So now I can turn to introducing Professor Priscilla Soucek, John L. Loeb Professor and Director of Graduate Studies at the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University. At the University of Michigan and the Institute of Fine Arts, she has taught generations of Islamic art historians and has published extensively on a range of subjects, always informing her work with her probing intelligence. Tonight, her lecture is entitled Wives, I've skipped ahead too much. Wives, Concubines, Sisters, and Daughters, Female Patrons of the Arts in the Islamic Near East. Please join me in welcoming Priscilla Soucek.
Thank you very much, Sheila. When Sheila asked me in the middle of the summer to speak to you today, I thought about what subject would interest really almost everyone amongst us. And I hit on the idea that female patronage of the arts is a topic which has run through the research and publications of many HIA members. So that was the theme I selected. It has been an interesting journey to study this subject and to try to draw together my thoughts for you this evening. My goal this evening is to take stock of our mutual accomplishments in highlighting the ways in which women patronized the arts in the visual arts in the Near East during the 8th to the 17th centuries. My decision to speak about this topic arose from my realization that many of us have addressed some facet of it in our individual research. I regret that I will not be able to mention the contributions of all those present, or this evening, or all our colleagues who will be here tomorrow, but to have done so would have turned my remarks into a serial bibliography. My hope is that by presenting the highlights of what I have learned, we will be able to benefit from this conference to lay the foundations for future collective action. Even if these are modest in scale, such as a collective web-based bibliography to which we can individually add references to our personal publications, I will feel rewarded. In my remarks, I've attempted to point out topics or questions which look to me promising as avenues of investigation. I have tried to identify some of the circumstances or conditions that permitted or encouraged women to patronize the visual arts. Finally, I have explored whether the objects or structures connected with female patrons were visibly or demonstrably gendered. As you're aware, in the broad realm of art history and its related disciplines, the focus of, quote, feminist art history, unquote, is on women as makers of art, a movement that was given impetus by Linda Nochlund's 1971 essay, Why Are There No Great Women Artists? As I can attest from reading admission applications, this question continues to resonate with today's undergraduates. As you are aware, speaking on this topic today would have severely constricted my presentation. So I have elected to focus on the much broader question of the role of women as supporters and patrons of the visual arts. Today, I would like to begin by recognizing our pioneer voice in the profiling of female agency, namely Nabia Abbott. Her thoughtful explorations of the status of women in Arabian society, published between 1936 and 1942, provide a wealth of information that can be used to probe more particular questions. The issue which haunted her was how and why the independent-minded wives of the earliest Muslim rulers were replaced by legions of concubines plucked from the borders of the ever-expanding empire. For her, the turning point came in the short and otherwise unremarkable reign of Yazid III, which occupied only a few months of the year 744. He had the distinction of being the first son of a concubine to occupy the throne. He was to have plenty of company. From the early 9th century until the arrival of the Seljuks in the mid-11th century, the Abbasid caliphs only rarely married. The genetic diversity which this policy provided may well have contributed to the Abbasid dynasty's longevity, but the lives and accomplishments of individual Abbasid concubines seem to be obscured by the mist of time. One topic which would repay investigation is whether the legal status and rights of concubines were viewed differently by the legal scholars and authorities of the various traditions and regions. The meager scholarly attention so far accorded to the lives of concubines is in sharp contrast to the numerous studies devoted to their male counterpart, the Mamluk. One of the questions I have been unable to answer is whether concubines were able to build and endow buildings, because, as I understand it, they could not own land. That conclusion suggests itself from the personal history of some concubines, even those who were eventually freed or manumitted. It seems clear from various references that only free persons, whether male or female, could legally marry. On the other hand, the evidence compiled by Noha Sadek about the patronage of architecture at Zabid in the Yemen demonstrates that female slaves could, in that region at least, build mosques. As she notes in this essay, the region's current political instability makes it impossible to ascertain whether any of these buildings survive. It is therefore impossible to know whether the structures are erected by the free and the servile, by men or by women, were physically distinct in any way from each other. One indirect way to approach the history of concubines is through the rise to prominence of eunuchs, whose primary responsibility was to safeguard the virtue of sequestered women. The presence of significant numbers of eunuchs at a court appears to be a marker for the less documented phenomenon of female seclusion. Even the links in the human chain, which actually passed through Spain, which produced eunuchs from young men captured in distant European and African conflicts, is worthy of scrutiny. Beyond their obvious role as guardians, eunuchs could also serve as the channel through which cloistered women communicated with the outside world, and even at times provided those women with opportunities for artistic patronage. As is well documented in the Ottoman world, and we see here the Topkapı Palace plan, alliances between a ruler's mother and that court's eunuchs could support a power structure with widespread consequences for the functioning of the state. Among other possible outcomes, the alliance of court women with eunuchs could facilitate their role as builders of important architectural monuments. Although a closer scrutiny of the court practices of the different dynasties and regions will probably reveal strong differences among them, Abbasid precedents do seem to have provided a model for the rulers of other regions and period as they devised strategies to protect and safeguard their female relations. The impact of Abbasid court practice on Mamluk Egypt seems to be a particularly fruitful area for study. Both the Abbasid courts and the Mamluk courts employed a woman known as the Kahramana to administer the affairs of the court's women. Evidently, those individuals were able to act on their own in the wider world, and buildings erected by at least one such kahramana are mentioned in the sources. The unbeatable combination of voluminous written sources and large numbers of standing monuments suggests that the study of female patronage in Mamluk Egypt is going to be particularly rewarding. Huwaith al-Harithi's survey of structures built in the 15th century, which is supported by a text that deals specifically with that period, provides a logical starting point for further study. The foundation which she has provided was further enhanced by efforts to track down and photograph the standing structures built by Mamluk women, and a number of those images are now available to us through the Miracle of Art store. I show you here a comparison of the well-known monument erected by Sultan Qala'un and the much smaller structure sponsored by his wife Fatima Khatun, more commonly known as Saleh. I think these two structures deserve to be studied together. Aside from what can be learned through a consideration of the history of eunuchs and concubines, there are also nuggets of information that can be harvested from texts. A clearer sense of the architectural and social history of the sequestration of women may well give individual comments new value and meaning. Although I have not been able to add to our meager knowledge of the cultural attainments of the Buyid dynasty, who ruled much of Iran and Iraq during the 10th century, a new addition to the records of what might be called Buyid tourism may have a potential to answer a nagging question. As is well known, the Buyids like to visit the Achaemenid ruins at Persepolis, and their inscriptions are inscribed on various parts of the building, recording those visits. But the Buyids also traveled elsewhere. One of the most important Buyids, Adad-ad-Dawla, is said to have made a special visit to the Abbasid palaces of Samarra. When his local guide offered to show him the women's quarters of that palace, he declined. He did not want to trespass on the caliph's private domain, even though the structure where it had been housed lay in ruins. I have not yet had a chance to examine that text where this incident is described, but it's possible that it may shed some light on the vexing question of where women lived in the vastness of the caliphal palace. As you can see from his sketch plan, this palatial zone was extensive. There are numerous structures and subdivisions and apartments, but unfortunately, the exact function of these various zones and buildings has yet to be clarified. In seeking an overview of the character and goals of female patronage, I look for examples of it among the earliest Muslim rulers. Thanks to the detailed investigations of Nabia Abbott, the lives and even the personalities of some of these rulers' female relations have been characterized. In general, the earliest Muslim rulers married their cousins, conforming to a well-established regional pattern, but most also kept concubines. Since the reign of the Umayyad ruler Abdul Malik is often taken as a starting point for our consideration of caliphal patronage in the form of the Dome of the Rock. And I show here a view of the building's exterior and interior, the latter being, of course, particularly renowned for its well-preserved and largely original colored glass and gilded mosaics. So I wondered if Abdul Malik's reign could also have marked the instigation of female patronage. The most likely candidate seemed to be his double first cousin, which is first cousin on both sides, and his favorite wife, Atika bint Yazid. She is remembered as the pinnacle of female Umayyad aristocracy, and is said to have been related directly to nearly a dozen caliphs, among them her grandfather Muawiyah, her father Yazid, and her son Yazid II. These links make her simultaneously the granddaughter, daughter, sister, and wife of these several rulers. Her pedigree also underscores the complicated genealogical web by which the earliest Muslim rulers were linked. Despite this illustrious pedigree, the only work of art with which she is linked in the sources is a sleeveless, jewel-encrusted jacket or tunic known as the badana of Atika. This garment was passed down as an heirloom among the wives of several Umayyad and Abbasid rulers. In general, a badana is a tunic made of soft fabric such as linen. However, the fact that Atika's badana was encrusted with rubies on both the front and the back suggests that it must have been made of some stiffer fabric. No depiction of Atika's badana is known, but the fact that it was unique suggests that it had been acquired as booty. If it had been something they could replicate, they probably would have done, since everyone seemed to love it. The manner in which the badana was covered with rubies on both front and back suggests to me a kinship with the bejeweled vestments of late Sasanian royalty, such as those the garment on the ruler in the rock-cut reliefs at Taki Bustan in western Iran. I don't know how clear this is, but the ruler's garment is got jewels all over it. It must be, I don't know what the fabric is, it must be fairly stiff because you can see the jewels are sort of, they're set in, they have sort of settings, and this depiction of a divinity, also his garment is also very stiff because it has rows of pearls along the hem. So I don't know what Atika's garment was made out of, but conceivably something equally substantial. As I said, Atika's garment was handed down through the generations of the Umayyad family and eventually reached the Abbasids. It figured in the wedding celebrations of Zubaydah bint Jafar, the granddaughter of the Caliph al-Mansur, when she married her double first cousin, Harun ibn al-Mahdi, known as al-Rashid. It is with Zubaydah that we can finally identify an important female patron of architecture. She and her husband Harun are well documented in their devotion to the well-being of pilgrims traveling from Iraq to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Harun built shelters at intervals along this route from Kufa to Mecca and Medina, marking the intervals of a day's journey. Zubaydah came along and constructed support facilities at intermediate points with a particular focus on providing the pilgrims with water. She is said to have ordered the construction of cisterns, the digging of wells, and the construction of channels to bring water from mountain springs to the pilgrimage route. Although probably her contributions did not involve the expenditure of nearly as much money as all the structures erected by Harun, it is Zubaydah whose name became legendary for her support of the well-being of individual pilgrims. In her honor, later generations identified the route between Kufa and Medina and Mecca as Darb Zubaydah, Zubaydah's road. And later travelers continue to speak glowingly of her beneficence and support of pilgrims and the pilgrimage. Although I set out to examine the role of gender in the physical works of art and architecture, my findings in this arena are decidedly meager. Information about palace ownership, for example, among the Abbasids suggests that one and the same structure could pass from a male owner to a female one, and then back again to another man without significant alteration. In the last instance, when a woman refurbished a palace for a man, her renovations were carried out in a few days and were apparently limited to a fresh coat of whitewash and some new textiles for hangings and curtains. This palace was not an insignificant structure, but remained at the core of the Caliphal quarter on the east bank of the Tigris for several centuries that separate the return of the caliphs from Samarra to Baghdad in 892 and the city's fall to the Mongols in 1258. So the palace that we're talking about is somewhere in this zone here. Although one certainly cannot exclude the possibility that a female architectural patronage would have had a different taste in furnishings than a male one, evidence for a gendered discourse in architectural forms is elusive. The fact that women in a position of power or authority built structures indistinguishable from those erected for and by men seems to be demonstrated by the physical evidence that survives from various periods. These include various Timurid monuments, certain the monuments in the Shah Zinde cemetery in Samarkand, and the structures erected by Shah Rukh's wife Gohar Shah at Herat, and also the buildings erected by the Ottoman Hatice Sultan. These include structures which are visually and technically indistinguishable from those erected by men. And even more surprisingly, she built military fortifications, which really does sound like a rather masculine undertaking. Perhaps I'm really looking, or was looking, in the wrong place for evidence. Instead of looking at architecture, I should perhaps have been focusing on the portable arts. We know from textual evidence that some royal concubines had personal wealth in the form of luxury goods. Perhaps they accumulated opulent objects and other valuable substances such as perfumes, incense, and scented wood because they were legally barred from the ownership of land and hence normally could not construct buildings and create endowments to support them. If it's possible that women were particularly drawn to luxury portable goods, then perhaps it's fitting that our one solid example of a category of objects where their physical appearance can said to be gendered is the ivory caskets produced in Spain at Cordova or the nearby palace enclave at Medinat al-Zahra. As a reading of the inscriptions on these objects has demonstrated, the caskets decorated exclusively with vegetal ornament were given to women. And in some cases, it is clear that the object was intended to celebrate the birth of a male child, whereas those with figural embellishment were intended for male recipients and celebrated their success in other arenas. These examples of ivories, I think, are both clear and compelling. But where are the other examples that create a gendered reading of pattern or decoration? Admittedly, our museum collections are filled with anonymous objects bearing only vegetal ornament and others embellished heavily with figures. At this point, I have no answers as to whether we should assign these to male or female patrons, only questions. I started my inquiry into female patronage with both questions and the expectation of some answers. What I have encountered is the stories of a number of remarkable women whose actions challenged our ideas of female accomplishment in a variety of ways. While I'm well aware that I did not survey the entire period of Islamic domination, nor the entire region covered by this religious community, I did identify, I feel, a few notable personalities whose lives and accomplishments are worthy of our study and respect. However modest my personal accomplishment today, I would like to think that Nabia, Atika, Zubaida, Saleh, and Gohar Shad, and Hadij Sultan, and their many anonymous sisters would approve. So let us go forward and collectively engage in a deeper and more comprehensive examination of the role of women as patrons and supporters of the visual arts. Thank you.